Mhm. Okay, so magandang gabi sa lahat. Tayo ngayon ay sa bagong lesson natin, yung limang unang aklat ng Old Testament. So, ang tawag na dyan ay Torah. So, yung objective natin, familiarize tayo sa history and geography of Pentateuch. At kung saan ito nagmula, kung saan lugar, makikita natin yung the progress of redemption in the books of Pentateuch. Ang Pentateuch, napaka-importante na aklat ito, no? Kasi ito yung ang tinatawag natin na fundamental, no? Ng istorya ng Biblia. Dito natin makikita yung mga promises na it's fulfilled in the New Testament. Ito yung pinaka-foundation ng history ng Israelites. So, pag-usapan din natin yung approach ng critique, the approach to the Old Testament by modern scholarship. Actually, ay hindi ko na nga kinuha yung, hindi ko na nilagay dito yung sa Pentateuch, meron silang tinatawag na higher criticism, tawag na the source of the Pentateuch. That they said that they have the so-called redactor or editor of the books. So to see the way in which Christ is portrayed in the Pentateuch, and also to see the importance of Pentateuch in the life of believers. So yung Pentateuch ay Torah ang tawag na doon sa Hebrew, na ibig sabihin ay law. Penta ay galing sa Greek word, galing sa penta means 5, at yung 5-part books. So, let me see that. So, Pentateuch ay may 5 aklat. No? Aklat ng Genesis, creation to Egypt, Exodus, deliverance from Egypt and establishment of the covenant, then Leviticus is about the law of worship, and Numbers, wilderness wandering. Numbers, kasi may dalawang, I cannot remember it, they have 2, ang tawag nito na they listed the para kang nagpa sa NCO, no? Tawag nito, NSO. No? Then Deuteronomy, law to new generation. Actually, Deuteronomy is just a repetitions of some of the 3 books. No? Just Moses repeated their experience from the wilderness. So the first book, Pentateuch, so we will discuss it a little bit. So Pentateuch consists of 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the first 5 books of the Bible, ito makikita both on the Hebrews and Christians, are fundamentals to all scriptures, and now as one of the most important portions of the Word of God. So even the Jews still believe, or the Muslims believe on the 5 books of Moses. So for the Jews, these books contain the authority that rests of their scripture. So ito yung pinaka-importante, no, sa kanila. Ito yung instruction sa kanila. So evidence kung bakit importante sa kanila, even during exile, it was the books of Moses that they frequently read in the synagogue. So whenever they go, they always read the Torah. So itong pinaka-importante sa kanila. No? So it means teaching or instructions. Pentateuch came from the Greek word Pentateuch, meaning 5 books or 5 volumes or books, after the Jewish designation, the 5/5 of the law. So yung Pinta means 5 and Teok means a case for carrying papyrus rules, or sometimes they call that screw. So the divisions of this writing into 5 separate books. Before it was just a one scroll containing all the words that will be carried by a person. But now it's already 5 books, separate books. Oh, nandiyan pa. So letter C, Pentateuch word derived from the Greek penta, meaning 5, and theok, originally meaning a case for carrying papyrus rules, but later in letter usage, meaning the scroll. So the Jews call it Torah, meaning instruction, which is often rendered in English by law, like in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, and Luke 16:17, the law. Although each book is a unit, together they form a larger unit and unity from Exodus through Deuteronomy. So ito yung ginagawa nila, no? So we will study the chronological events and sa ating patuloy na pag-aaral nito, the emphasis of the theological emphasis of each book and the structural composition of books from Exodus through Deuteronomy. So we will discuss that each book. Hindi, parang survey lang ito, no? Kasi pag isa-isahin natin ay mahirap. Baka abutin tayo ng 1 taon. So the unity, the 5 books, form the backbone for the rest of the Old Testament and New Testament theologically. or teachings. You can see that in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 5 and 10, and Joshua chapter 24, and Acts chapter 13. So we will study that later on. So the books contain a chronological and theological progression. You see, the revelations of God is not given all in one time. It is always progressive. So it is the Pentateuch is the founding of theocracy, the reestablishment of God's rule on earth. So true man over evil and over all creation. We know that in the Old Testament, that in the Genesis, yung tao ay nawala, no? But here in the Pentateuch, especially in Exodus and to Deuteronomy, God reestablished the rule of theocracy, the rule of God, the authority of God. So Genesis, the origins begin behind the founding of theocracy. The promised blessings of the seed in the land and all the people through the seed. We will learn that in the book of Genesis. Then the Exodus, the book of Exodus, the redemptions of the seed of Abraham out of bondage and the formations of these people to be a nation with a constitution, or we call that covenant. And so they are governed by the law of God. The law of God was given in the book of Exodus. So we see that the redemptions of the people, the chapter 1 to 10, their bondage, and chapter 11 to 18 is their redemption. So it is very important because it gives us the history of the nation of Israel, and also its lessons to us. There's a lot of lesson beyond the wilderness experience of the Israelites. There are a lot of books written about Exodus. Some of them are the Sinai experience. So leadership books are also based on the book of Exodus. Okay. So we can also see the formation of the people with the covenant, the moral judgment, verse 19 to 20, chapter 19 to 20, the social judgment, chapter 21 to 24, and the cultic or the worship judgment, actually called that cultic. Nagbaliktad, ha? Okay, so nagkagulutungkol ko. Leviticus, the Israelites' culture is established by providing a manual of ordinances to help with their needs when approaching to God, who is going to live among his people in holiness. Actually, Leviticus is about the worship of the Israelites. And then we have the Numbers. So Yahweh orders Israel walk, the military arrangement. Yeah, here the census of the tribes. I think 2 times. No? They have the census in the book of Numbers. So the transport of the sacred palladium. But Israel disrupt Yahweh order, or YHWH. Nevertheless, the promised blessing cannot be prostrated from within or from without. So whatever the happened there, the promises of God continue to be fulfilled, whether the Israelites will obey it or not. Then the last is the autonomy, the reconstitution of the nation under Yahweh, or Yahweh, to enter the land through covenant renewal in legal prophetic forms. So we will continue, we will discuss this. So you see, the autonomy is also a book that is very controversial, because the last part there, when Moses leave the command to Joshua. So if Moses was the author of the book, he could not write his death. That's why the book of the Deuteronomy, they said there are some redactors or editors. So the editors probably are the priest. So paano ni Moses may sulat yung namatay siya, no? So anyway, so that's the problem of the Deuteronomy. For the authorship, Moses. The authors of Pentateuch is anonymous, meaning hindi sinabi kung sino ang sumulat nito. But the books do give indications of Moses as its writer. So, nagiwala yung kwano. So, anyway, he was, for example, he was ordered by God to write the historical facts. Exodus chapter 17, verse 14, for example, the Lord told Moses to write an account of the battle with Amalekites. Exodus chapter 24, verse 4, Moses at Sinai wrote down all of the words and the law spoken by the Lord and repeated it to the people. So, hindi nga sinabi na si Moses, but the books in the Pentateuch are telling us that Moses is the one who wrote the 5 books. Numbers chapter 33, for example, verse 1 and 2, the Lord commands Moses to record the stages of Israel's journey from the time they came out of Egypt. So that is the book of Exodus. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 9 and 22. So the text says that Moses wrote this law and gave it to the priest and command them to read this law in front of all Israelites who appeared before the Lord. So these are things that telling us that Moses actually wrote the books. And so not only that, the rest, Moses is affirmed as the author of the book of Pentateuch in the rest of the Old Testament. Joshua chapter 1, verse 7 to 8. For example, after Moses' death, God instructed Joshua to obey all the law given by Moses. And to meditate it upon the books of the law, day and night. And so the one who gave them, written by Moses, the book of Moses, the book of law. So sometimes we call that the law of Moses, or the law of the law, or the law of Moses, or the law only. No? So the Joshua chapter 8, no? That's a very important verse 8, 32, 34, emphasized that all the words of the law were read to the people. And so, furthermore, his farewell address to the nation recorded in this chapter 34. So Joshua urged the people to be faithful to God by obeying all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. And that is in chapter 23, verse 6. So the book itself, the Pentateuch, indicate that Moses wrote the book. The Old Testament affirmed that. Also the New Testament referred to Moses as the author of the books of the Pentateuch, the author of the Pentateuch. For example, Matthew chapter 19, verse 18, where it gives the reference to the law of Moses or the book of Moses. So they have reference Mark chapter 12, verse 26. The law was referred as to the law of Moses. So while the gospel contained many references to Moses and his writing, the most important one are found in the Gospel of John. John chapter, I didn't record it. John chapter 1, verse 17, the gospel writer, John, states that the law was given through Moses. And in John chapter 1, verse 45, he reported that Philip told Nathanael he had found the one Moses wrote about the law. So John chapter 5, verse 46, 47, Jesus Christ declared that Moses wrote about him, but the Jews did not believe that he was the Christ because they did not believe what Moses wrote. And so Paul also indicate about Moses as the author of the Pentateuch. Romans chapter 10 verse 5, where Paul says that Moses described the righteousness that is by the law, and then goes on to quote Leviticus chapter 18 verse 5. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 15, Paul refers to the veil that covers the heart of the Jews when Moses is read. That's why some translation the law is read, Moses. So the law is sometimes called Moses law, or the law of Moses, or the books of Moses. And so not only that, Moses is testified to be the authors of the whole Pentateuch in anonymous way in Talmud and the church fathers. They affirm that Moses wrote the books of Pentateuch. So tapos na tayo mabilis, ano? But we will have some introductions in the book of Genesis. So the book of Genesis, this is just introduction of the book of Genesis, because we're gonna study it thoroughly. We will give more time on the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis has its internal outline that is based upon the repetitions of the word Bereshit, in the beginning. Some people probably they praise Eli Toledot, meaning these are the generation. So the book of Genesis actually is written about the generation. I think I wrote some of that now. Let me see that. These are the generations of the formula in the beginning, Bereshit, in Greek, in Hebrew, meaning in the beginning. The content is about the creation. It's found in chapter 1, verses 1 to chapter 2, verse 3. Then this is the account of the heaven and the earth, chapter 2, verse to chapter 4, verse 26. After that, begin again. This is the written account of Eden life. So the account of creation, the account of Eden, the genealogy of Seth to Noah, chapter 5 to chapter 6, verse 8. This is the account of Noah. So the contents is the tables of nations and Babel, chapter 6, verse 9 to 29. Then this is the account of after that we have the account after Adam, we have Noah. This is the account of Noah. So that is chapter 6, 9 to 29. Then this is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These are the children of Noah and their generation. Chapter 10, verses 1 to 9. So look at that. This is the account of Cain, the genealogy of Shem to Abraham. And this is the accounts of Torah. Let's begin with that. This is the account of the story of Abraham, chapter 11 to chapter 25. This is the account of Abraham's sons, Ismael. So this is the genealogy to Seth to Noah. So this is the account of Abraham's son, Isaac, the transitions of blessing from Israel to Jacob, chapter 25 to chapter 35. This is the account of Esau, the genealogy of Esau, chapter 36. Then this is the account of Jacob, or the son Jacob, Joseph, and Israel in Egypt. So this is just, a repetitions of genealogy of important men in the book of Genesis. Notice that there is actually a symmetrical pattern that finds Abraham as its center. Makikita niyo, no? So Hebrew, Eli, Toledot, meaning these are generations. And that is 10 sets, 10. Ito, genealogy, history of account follows. These are the things that follows. When you read the book of Genesis, you will see that. So from Genesis chapter 4, chapter 2, verse 4 to 11 to 26, it talks about the Toledot from Adam to Abraham. That is, sabi natin ay, this is the account of the heaven and the earth, chapter 2 to chapter 11, actually. But between that, Toledot from Adam to Abraham. Then from Genesis 11:27 to chapter 50, verse 26. Toledot from Abraham to Israel. So the generation. This is the generations of Abraham to Israel or Jacob. So Abraham is a prominent figures in the book of Genesis. Actually, chapter 1 to chapter 11, events predominant, the creation, the fall, the flood, the towers of Babel. After that, we have the call of Abraham, chapter 12 to chapter 50, actually the history of generation of Abraham and his son Isaac and Jacob. Isaac, then Isaac has a son Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons, and most of the rest of history in the book of Genesis is about Joseph. So chapter 1 to chapter 11 is about the race of Israel as a whole. But Genesis chapter 12 to 50, it's about the family of Abraham. It's over 2,000 years, the span of chapter 1 to chapter 11. And the story of family of Abraham is about 250 years. So thus the persons of Abraham stand at the center as the pivotal point of the book of Genesis. So the New Testament counterpart to Genesis is the book of Revelations. What is introduced in the book of Genesis find its conclusion in Revelation. Look at that. In Genesis, creations of the heavens and earth. Revelations, the new heaven and the new earth. Genesis talk about the tree of life in the garden. Revelation talks about the tree of life in the New Jerusalem. Genesis, a river runs through the garden. Revelation, the river runs through the New Jerusalem. The first marriage, Adam and Eve. The last marriage, the last Adam to the church. Genesis, the beginning of the care of Satan. Revelation, the end of Satan's career, the lake of fire. Genesis, death enters. Revelation, death is destroyed. Genesis, man lost privilege because of sin. In the book of Revelation, man regains privilege because of Christ. Genesis, the beginning of sorrow, pain, and death. In the book of Revelation, Christ wiped away all tears. No tears, no sadness in heaven. And that is how the two, the beginning and the end. So Genesis, the first murder. Revelation state no more death. Then death enter, death destroy. Oh, I already said that already. So doubly. So throughout Genesis, we see God's blessing and provision to man and man's failure to appreciate that grace. Ironically, this is illustrated by comparing the first and the last verse of the book. The book of Genesis begins with God. So in the beginning, God created. But the book of Genesis ends with a corpse in a coffin in Egypt. But this does not mean that Genesis is a book without hope. Or even in recording the death and burial of Joseph in Egypt, that is the last things there in the book of Genesis, in a coffin in Egypt. There is a continuing promise of redemption to come. So it ends, actually, the book of Genesis ends with the death of Joseph. So let me see if I have more here. So Genesis begins with God. In the beginning, God created. Genesis ends with a corpse in a coffin in Egypt, referring to the death of Joseph. Okay, so I think this is only a part of our discussion with the book of Genesis. So we will study the unformed and the unfilled, about the account of creation, why there is two accounts in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. Oh dear. Okay, so that's end our study today. So actually, some of these are will be discussion on book of Genesis. So the first chapter of the book of Genesis, we will study the interpretations of Genesis. But there are some people believe that it is the creation in chapter 1 it's about evolution. Then is it literal day, or is it so we have the gap theory, studying that, no? But we will not too much dwell with that, the interpretations of the creation. So okay. Then we will. Okay, so we're done.
Any question? My questions.
Meron kayong question?